Welcome back. I'm here to read to you the second half of Chapter 24, The Adventures of Blimp Boy. After a long evening of reminiscing, MG convinced Charlotte and Conner she had single-handedly put the Roaring into the Roaring Twenties. While she sipped from a homemade jug of potato gin, she told them all about her 5 failed marriages, her many connections to organized crime, and her early days of performing on a burlesque circuit. Even though Beau had found a reason to resent their guests, MG loved having an audience besides her grandnephew. Beau spent the whole evening looking over his map of the pyramid and the illustration of the talisman. He had only glanced up to glare spitefully at his new opponent, Conner, and Conner became so tired of the hateful looks he moved his seat so his back faced the archaeologist. At night, MG pulled out some guest cots and set them up for Charlotte and Conner to sleep on. She tied down the gears of the Charlie Chaplin so it wouldn't continue to float west while they slept, and then she and Beau retired to their rooms in the back of the gondola. Spending the night in a blimp was anything but restful. The sudden bursts of elevation and unexpected turbulence made it very difficult for Conner and his mom to stay asleep. However, Charlotte was kept awake by much more than a bumpy ride. Something had been eating at her since she learned about Beau's parents, something she was desperate to get out. "Conner, are you awake?" she asked. "I've been able to sleep since the sudden dip over Persia," he said. "Well, I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you, honey," Charlotte said. "I'm really amazed by everything you've created, not just in the adventures of Blimp Boy, but in all your other stories. Why have you never shared them with me before?" "I guess I never wanted to bother you," he said. "I first started writing shortly after Dad died. You were always busy with work and taking care of us. I never wanted to put one more thing on your plate." Unknowingly, Conner had just answered a difficult question she had been meaning to ask him. "I suppose that's why there aren't any mothers in your stories?" Charlotte asked. "Your writing represents so many facets of your life, and I've spent so much time away from you, I can't expect any representation of me in your writing. You know, I think one of the reasons I'm so afraid of you and your sister are missing out on your lives is because I've missed out on so much of your lives. I'm sorry that there have been so many times you felt like you didn't have a mom. It's never the kind of mom I wanted to be. Life had just other plans." This was the heartbreaking thing for him to hear, as it was for Charlotte to confess. The Siblings was the first story that made Conner realize just how meaningful each character in his writing could be. He never thought the lack of a character could also be symbolic too. But even though there was no mothers in his stories, it didn't mean Charlotte was missing from them. She didn't see the stories like Conner did. "Mom, you've got it all wrong," Conner said. "You're in my stories a bunch, you just don't realize it. Auburn Sally is based on more people than just Goldilocks. There's a reason I made her hair the same color as yours. After Dad died, you sailed through all the hard times so bravely it reminded me of a pirate sailing through a storm. You were the real inspiration behind Starboardia. Jack and Goldilocks just helped me add some layers to it." "Really?" Charlotte asked. "You're not just saying that?" "You know if I was lying to you. You always do," Conner said. "It's not all, though. Every day when you went to work and took back-to-back shifts just so we could get by, I always thought you must have had some superpowers to get through it. That's why I made Bolt's superhero suit the same color as your nursing scrubs. You have been gone a lot, but you were still a superhero to me and Alex." Charlotte was moved to tears. She leaned over Conner's cot and kissed him on the cheek. "I love you so much, sweetheart," she said. "And from now on, I want to be the very first person you share your stories with." "The next one will go straight off the presses and into your hands," he said. "I promise." Charlotte's heart gave a sigh of relief. Knowing she wasn't missing from her son's imagination felt like a weight had been lifted off her chest. And Conner rarely got to reassure his mom about anything, so he was happy he could put her mind at ease. They both finally drifted off to sleep as the blimp drifted over Arabia. The following morning, Conner and Charlotte awoke as the sun rose and shined through the Charlie Chaplin's round windows. It felt even hotter than it had in the jungle in India. When Conner looked out the window, he saw that they were floating above an endless sandy desert. He could barely see the tip of a triangle peering out of the horizon. "The Pyramid of Anesthesia," Conner shouted. "We're almost there." His excited declaration woke up MG and Beau. They hurried out of their rooms dressed in pajamas and joined Conner at the window. MG couldn't see until she strapped on her goggles and used them like prescription glasses. "That's the pyramid, all right," she said. "Personally, I would have built my own pyramid closer to a beach, but to each their own." Less than an hour later, MG was piloting the Charlie Chaplin toward the sandy earth beside the pyramid. The landing alone was enough evidence for why blimps never became the transportation of the future as MG had predicted. The bottom of the gondola bumped across the sand over a dozen times before the blimp came to a stop. Each contact made the whole gondola rattle and things toppled overboard. Once they landed, the boys got ready for the race of for the talisman. Beau fastened the straps of his aviator hat, laced his boots, and zipped up his leather jacket. Conner tied his sneakers, applied sunblock, and put his backpack over his shoulders. Conner tried offering Beau a friendly handshake before they started, but Beau wouldn't even look at him. Outside the blimp, MG drew a line in the sand and made Conner and Beau stand behind it. The old woman raised a revolver in the air, careful not to aim it at the Charlie Chaplin. "I want a good, clean race," MG said. "No cheating, no sabotage, and no swearing. May the best archaeologist win." "Good luck, honey," Charlotte said. "Please watch where you're going. Pyramids are dark and dusty." MG fired the revolver, and Beau and Conner charged toward the pyramid of anesthesia. The thick sand was almost impossible to run in, but even wearing tall boots and a leather jacket in the desert heat, Beau was much faster than Conner. Once Beau was in front of Conner, he purposely kicked sand backwards, aiming for Conner's eyes. "Hey," Conner said, "that's cheating." "Eat my dust," Beau said. The boys reached the base of the pyramid of anesthesia. Beau immediately ran to the north side of the pyramid, which had a wide stone staircase. Conner knew the entrance was on the south side of the pyramid, so he ran around it. Beau noticed Conner going in a different direction, so he followed him from higher ground. They arrived at the entrance on the south side of the pyramid at the same time. "How did you know where the entrance was?" Beau asked him. "Because I made it," Conner said truthfully in a sarcastic tone, so Beau was none the wiser. The young archaeologist kicked the entrance open, and a gust of sandy air almost knocked the boys down the pyramid. The entrance led to a long, dark, and dusty hall. The walls were hung with a row of unlit torches and were engraved with hieroglyphics from floor to ceiling. Cobwebs draped across the hall like torn curtains. Clearly, there hadn't been another person in the pyramid for thousands of years. Beau took a torch off the wall and pulled a matchbook out of his pocket. He struck a match using the zipper of his jacket and lit the torch. Conner removed a flashlight from his backpack and hid it against the wall until the batteries worked. The boys ran down the hall, venturing further into the pyramid. The hall was just the beginning of a multi-dimensional maze that zigzagged through the pyramid. As soon as the maze split into different directions, Beau purposefully chose the path opposite from Conner, hoping it would get him to the pharaoh's chamber faster. Conner just rolled his eyes and took the route he knew would get him there quickly. After a mile of winding, narrow passages, steep staircases, and sharp turns, Conner stepped into an enormous room at the very bottom of the pyramid. The walls were covered with layers and layers of tombs like novels stacked against the giant's bookcase. The crypt contained the mummified corpses of the pharaoh's soldiers. The room marked the halfway point of the pyramid's maze, which continued on the other side. Beau entered the room several moments after Conner. He was red-faced and winded. Obviously, the archaeologist was having a rougher time navigating the maze than Conner was. Beau looked around in astonishment. He had never seen so many tombs in one place. "What is this?" Beau asked. "This is the pharaoh's army," Conner said. Beau saw where the maze continued on the other side and dashed toward it, hoping to get a head start on Conner. "No, Beau, wait!" Conner yelled after him. "Nice try, but I'm not falling for..." Beau suddenly tripped on a rope that was so thin he couldn't see it. The rope snapped and two enormous metal gongs fell from the ceiling and crashed to the floor on either side of him. The noise was deafening, and the boys covered their ears before it damaged their eardrums. "That was loud enough to wake the dead," Beau said. "That's the whole point," Conner said. All of the crypts began shaking at once. One by one, the lids were pushed off, and the pharaoh's mummified soldiers slowly crawled out of their tombs. They moaned and groaned in agony and crept toward Conner and Beau. "Mummies!" Beau yelled. "So the legend is true! It's all true!" Beau and Conner continued into the second half of the maze, and the mummies chased after them. Once again, Beau took an alternative route from Conner on purpose. Conner knew the second part of the maze even better than he knew the first. He had no hesitation whatsoever as he snaked through hall after hall, climbing higher and higher into the pyramid. Each level he reached became smaller and smaller the closer he got to the top of the pyramid. Soon he came to a pair of double golden doors with the hieroglyphics of a phoenix carved into it. "I did it," Conner said proudly. "I made it to the pharaoh's chamber." His victory was cut short by a blood-chilling scream coming from the maze behind him. It was followed by the clamor of monstrous wails and growls. It sounded like the mummies had caught up with Beau. "Help!" Beau screamed. "Help me!" Conner was conflicted about what to do next. He was only a few short steps away from retrieving the talisman, the only thing he needed to complete his army and save his friends in the fairy tale world. For a split second, Conner thought Beau deserved to be attacked by mummies for the way he had acted. However, Conner knew his mom would be upset if only one of them came back out alive. So to avoid a potential guilt trip, and because it was the right thing to do, Conner turned around and went to save the archaeologist. Stupid conscience, Conner mumbled to himself. It never knows when to quit. He followed the screams through the maze as he carefully took note of the route to get back to the Pharaoh's chamber. Conner found Beau in a corner of the maze surrounded by 8 mummies. He was on the floor and the mummies were viciously hitting and kicking him. "Hey," Conner said, "toilet paper heads, over here." The mummies turned to Conner and crept toward him. He shined his flashlight directly in their eyes, temporarily blinding them. The mummies scattered like roaches and Conner helped Beau to his feet. "You saved my life," Beau said in shock. "I gave you life," Conner said under his breath. "I wasn't expecting you to come back for me, especially after how I treated you," Beau said. "Thank you." "You can thank me later," Conner said. "I found the Pharaoh's chambers. Follow me. There are a lot more mummies where these guys came from." Conner quickly retraced his steps through the maze to the highest point of the pyramid where the Pharaoh's chamber was located. Beau was amazed by how effortlessly he was moving through the pyramid. Finally, the boys arrived at the golden doors with the phoenix, and Conner grabbed the handles to push them open. "Wait," Beau said. "Remember the Pharaoh's chamber is patrolled by his most treasured and loyal guardian. It might take both of us to defeat it." Conner let out a light laugh. "Yeah," he said. "I wouldn't worry about that if I were you." He pushed open the doors, and the boys stepped into Pharaoh Eczema's chamber. Unlike the rest of the pyramid, the chamber was spotless. The walls were made of pure gold, and the Pharaoh's colorful casket rested on a platform in the center of the room. They knew they were at the top of the pyramid because the high ceiling rose to a peak above them. There was a small opening in the ceiling that allowed a ray of sunlight to shine directly on the casket. Beau eyed the chamber nervously. Something was missing. "Where is the Pharaoh's most treasured and loyal guardian?" he asked. The boys heard a high-pitched barking. Peeking around the casket on the floor was a small mummified dog. Although it barked at Conner and Beau, it was clearly more frightened of them than they were of it. "It's a dog?" Beau asked. "I didn't know anything more treasured and loyal than someone's dog," Conner said. Conner held out his hand and the dog slowly approached it and sniffed around it. There was something familiar about Conner, and the mummified dog became excited when he sensed it. He happily ran around Conner's feet and rolled onto his back, allowing him to rub the wraps covering his belly. "Good dog, Bones," Conner said. "Who's a nice 3,000-year-old pup, huh?" "You know the dog's name?" Beau asked him suspiciously. Yeah," Conner said. "I must have read it somewhere." They heard stomping echo through the maze until outside the chamber. Conner and Beau turned and saw hundreds and hundreds of mummies creeping toward them. "We've got to get the talisman," Conner said. "Those mummies are about to take out millenniums worth of pent-up aggression on us." The boys hustled to the casket and tried sliding the lid off. It was incredibly heavy, and they had to use all of their strength. Just as the mummies entered the chamber, Conner and Beau knocked the lid over and saw the golden talisman around the neck of the mummified pharaoh. It grossed him out to touch the dead body, but Conner pulled the talisman off the corpse and put it over his own neck. "Knock it off," Conner yelled at the approaching mummies. Now that Conner had complete control over them, all the mummy soldiers stood, froze, and attentively put their hands at their sides. Beau looked at the talisman around Conner's neck and became very depressed. The young archaeologist had spent most of his life dreaming about the day he'd find it, only to see it on someone else's possessions. He looked so pathetic, Conner couldn't help feel sorry for him. "Look, I only need the talisman for a little while," he said. "I'm going to use the mummies to help out some friends. When I'm done, you can have it." Beau was overjoyed to hear this. "Really?" he asked. "Totally," Conner said. "Besides, it won't be worth much where I'm from." The archaeologist squinted at Conner. He had been trying to figure out how Conner knew so much about the pyramid, and finally had come to only one probable conclusion he could think of. "You're Pharaoh Eczema reincarnated, aren't you?" Beau said. "That's how you knew where the entrance was, how you moved so quickly through the maze, and how you knew the name of his dog." "It's way more complicated than that," Conner said. "I'm not sure you'd even believe me." "Try me," Beau said. "I'm an archaeologist. I live for complication." Conner sighed. After their race through the pyramid, he was too tired to come up with any more lies. "Okay, fine," Conner said with a shrug. "But before I explain, let me ask you this. How familiar are you with classic fairy tales?" And that's the end of the chapter. The next chapter is called The Life and Times of Queen Trebella, written and directed by Trebella. I'll see you guys then.